Hi everyone, welcome to Data Trends. It's coming to the end of April now here, and lockdown is somewhat easing off, which is pleasing to see, and pleasing to all, I'm sure. The data hiring space right now is extremely buoyant. There's no other ways of describing it. There's some really exciting opportunities around in the marketplace. Businesses are really starting to press ahead with their hiring plans. So I'm feeling particularly chirpy, in a good mood, probably relating to what I've just said there. But so yeah, but on today's episode, we're delighted to have Avi Marco. So Avi is a true, if you like, data thought leader, strategist, evangelist. Avi has worked for the likes of Betfair, Director of Enterprise Data Services, BSkyB, Head of BI, and also Sage as Vice President of Data. So it's safe to say, Avi, you know a fair bit about the data world and landscape. So I think to kick things off, it would be good to hear more about a little bit about your background. I know you and I know each other well, Avi, but for our benefit of our audience, it'd be good to understand a bit more about you and your background.
Okay, thanks, Ryan, and a very, very, very kind introduction. Thank you. So background, what I do at the moment is I work as an independent consultant. At the moment, I've been doing that for a few years. Working with a range of companies from startups moving into early maturity to larger companies, and also sort of in the non-profit sector. So a whole range. And what I try to do is sort of bring to bear my experience, I suppose, share some of my war stories, my battle scars, of what worked, what didn't work, what I've learned, and to try to guide people and steer people through the maze, which is data. And I think a lot of that generally starts with me just saying to people, why are you doing what you're planning to do? And what do you expect to see at the end of it? And how does it actually help you realize your business ambitions? I've got something that I sort of throw in, and it's, if the answer to your question is I'm going to build a data warehouse, it's possible you're asking the wrong question. And you really want to focus on business outcomes rather than data technologies or data solutions, certainly in that first conversation.
Excellent, thank you, Avi. Sure. I mean, so the title of our podcast is Data Trends. So with that in mind, I think one of the sort of the questions that I would have for you, and I'm sure our audience would be interested in, is what trends do you currently see within the data and BI space, and perhaps why?
Okay, so that's interesting. So I think in some ways we're seeing the same trends we've always seen in the data space. Perhaps we're naming them differently. Perhaps we're more focused on one or the other. But I think the fundamental challenges we face are we have more data than we can process effectively. And as we've seen, as we've been able to process more, we've acquired more. And it's become easier to generate and acquire data. So that problem remains. There's more data than we can process. Data is stubbornly distributed over multiple systems in multiple streams, always has been, still is. And data solutions, in my view, and this is just sort of my perspective on it, are massively over-engineered. And I think that's to some degree our fault in the data industry. We've allowed that to happen. In fact, we've encouraged that in some ways. And I think we're still beset with the problems of quality of data. So those four are still there, and they've always been. So when you ask about trends, what I see is there is an explosion of tools which purport to solve those problems, and some of them do, and they definitely help. But I think it's really important not to fall into that trap of thinking the next tool that comes along is going to be the panacea and is going to be the one that is going to make things okay. The reality is adoption of a tool isn't a solution, it's a means to getting to a solution. I think it's really, really important to hold that in mind. I think the other thing that I'm noticing is that leadership within enterprises are understanding that a plan isn't a strategy. So I've been asked many times to produce a data strategy, and what actually people want to say is, when are we going to have the warehouse? When are we going to have the integration? When are we going to have this? And when are we going to have that? That's a plan. Whereas a strategy is about talking about what are you going to do with data? How are you going to use data to improve your business outcomes, to improve outcomes for your customers or for whomever? And a strategy is that. And then we have to look at how can data enable and empower and affect that strategy. And that's where we begin to plan. And perhaps the third thing I'd sort of mention in that area is a real recognition I'm now seeing that data quality is the problem. And we've always known it, and people have sort of given it a nod and then invested in massive programs of integration and transformation and various other things to try to fix the data that was broken at the start. And I often wonder, why would you spend so much money fixing a problem which you could have actually addressed at the point at which you captured the data? And where this becomes really interesting, I think, is in this, in what we're seeing now, is digital transformation. So we've got massive digital transformation going on. Many systems and platforms are being rewritten, recreated. We have an opportunity to get it right first time. And I'm seeing a greater recognition of that need within the data industry as a whole, moving away from fix after the fact to let's get it right first off.
Interesting. Yeah, I know you talked to me about that before, around it's not always about the technology, and more about methodology and the strategy and the reasoning behind why and what you're trying to do. So but as one of the questions that I'm always interested in when I speak to thought leaders like yourself, and it does probably go back a little bit to technology piece, is, I suppose, which data and BI and analytics software vendors do you think perhaps are gaining the most traction in the market right now? And I guess the reason behind why you think that would be good to hear.
Okay, so I think that's an interesting question, and I'm genuinely not sold on or signed up to any technology. I'm completely agnostic to technologies, and I think to one degree, I'm not going to answer your question, because I'm going to hold to the line that I think it is about actually the approach and the application of technology, which is a secret. And I think the analogy I draw is perhaps the pick and mix. If you remember the days more than a year and a half ago when we could go into the cinema and you've got the pick and mix stand, and you can pick a whole load of different sweets and various offerings, and you put them in a bucket. But what you know is, one, it's going to cost you a great deal of money when you go to check out. And the likelihood is there will be short-lived satisfaction, but at the end of it, you're still going to be hungry. And I think sometimes that technology question is analogous to that. It fundamentally doesn't matter, certainly at the initial stage, which technology you choose. What you need to understand is, what problem are you trying to fix, and will that technology enable it? But you did ask, and where are we seeing traction? Snowflake, everywhere. I'm seeing Snowflake mentioned everywhere. They're doing a great job of onboarding customers and getting customers to a certain stage in their data journey, and that's, I suppose, to be welcomed. Fivetran are beginning to become quite visible, and I suppose there's possibly a direct play there between them and Talend, perhaps. Are they competing in the same marketplace? Alteryx, I've always had an eye on what they're doing, and I think there is a play in the market for them. And then you've got other technologies. Google BigQuery, is interesting. What's happening with that? How does that interplay with other offerings they're offering? And I think the big question you also need to be looking at is the AWS and Azure conversation, shall we say, that's going on. So those businesses that define themselves as Microsoft or Azure houses, those who are looking at AWS as their core sort of platform, what does that mean and how does that play out? So again, I think the jury's out on that one, and whichever you choose, you then create the next problem, which is your cloud of clouds problem of how do I join together data that is in different clouds. I may have both Azure and AWS.
One of the, you mentioned Snowflake, and so, and the reason why I suppose I've picked that out from your answer is because from a recruiter's perspective right now, I would say it's probably the number one skill set I'm being asked to find from clients that I partner with, in terms of from a hands-on engineer right up to solution architect sort of level. So I'm just really interested as to why you think Snowflake has almost stood itself out and what they've done to do that, to achieve that. And interested in your insight around that.
Well, certainly from what I've seen, one is ease of adoption. If it's easy to adopt and start working and getting things to happen, then people will use your tool. And I think Snowflake certainly offers that. It offers sort of in the data ops kind of space. It's almost built for that, and allows people to operate the platform with relative ease, to control their costs with relative ease, to implement with relative ease. So why wouldn't you adopt? Again, it's not my, it's not for me to assess or validate whether technologies are better than any other technology. I've seen very successful implementations of applications and solutions on Snowflake. As with any technology, I've seen places where it's been more difficult. But that comes back again to the fundamental problem of what it is you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And yes, Snowflake will be right for a whole host of use cases, and clearly is doing a great job of marketing itself in the right places, and is getting people to part of the way along their data journey. So, yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, there's something it's just going back to the trends angle. It's just something that I'm seeing more and more now. But I appreciate there's a host of other vendors which are out there, but it's just something that I've picked up as a recruiter.
And I think it's undeniable. It's happening in the marketplace. Wherever you look. Snowflake is there and is being offered as part of the solution.
Absolutely. Okay. And again, I'd be really interested in your insight around some of the challenges facing the data world, in the next few years, and I suppose short, mid, and long term. If you any insight around what you see as the biggest challenge or a number of challenges would be good to hear.
Okay, so I think probably one of the biggest challenges at the moment is avoiding disappointment from what machine learning and AI offer. I think one of the things I've observed is a number of enterprises have invested heavily in AI, and seen very little return. And then that creates a sense of disappointment, and AI, machine learning don't work, or they don't give us what we need. And again, I think that comes back to that fundamental question. They didn't start with what's the objective, what are we trying to achieve? There are things that AI is well suited to do. There are things that perhaps it shouldn't be, used to apply. A good example is I've seen where data scientists have spent an awful lot of their time cleaning data before they get to do the really smart stuff that they do.
Yeah.
And that's a tremendous waste of a resource. Why would you use somebody who you're going to pay, a huge amount of money, who can do amazing things with data science, to do basic data cleansing? Perhaps you should have addressed that in the first place and done some of the basics, even though that's perhaps a little less attractive on the board pack when you say, our program is to do some data cleansing for the next 3 months. But that's one that I see. And again, I think the other one is this. The thing that I think is a little lacking at the moment in the data space is ultimately data reflects reality and not the other way around. And one of the things that's troubled me perhaps is with people producing analytics and insights and saying, my models are really working well, and I've tested my model and it's giving me great accuracy. And you look at it and you go, yeah, but it's wrong. It's fundamentally not correct. And they're going, yeah, but my stats are telling me that. And I'm saying, yeah, but look out the window. It's a bit like when you look at your app and it says, oh, it's sunny at 1500, and you look out your window and it's raining. Which one are you going to believe?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we need to ground data back into the real world. And accept that we should validate what we're finding against real world experience.
Do you find that you have a bit of pushback, if you like, from some other members of the data community around some of the challenges you talked about there? And I'm always interested to see I guess what I'm trying to say is that I speak to lots of data leaders like yourselves who have various different opinions on where the market's going and et cetera. Yeah. So I guess that's a challenge in itself, I would have thought, having, I suppose, working with like-minded or not so like-minded people, but the challenges around, I guess, people having different opinions on where and what the data world will look like moving forward.
Yeah, I think if one thing we've learned over the last 12 to 15 months is prediction is a very dangerous thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think it's valid that there are all of these differing opinions in the data world. There isn't one answer to this question. Again, it so depends. There isn't one use case for data. There isn't one problem that you're trying to solve with data. You may be trying to solve questions of customer engagement. You may be trying to solve questions of, it's very pertinent now, how to offer better medical services to people. You might be talking about digitalization of government data and various other things. These use cases are hugely different. So to pretend that there's one solution or one trend, would be, wouldn't be right. And I suppose it's one of the reasons when you look at, for instance, what Gartner might be saying around various tools, different tools are in different places in the quadrant, and they're doing different parts of solving different parts of the data problem. Now, because a tool is lowering the quadrant for one particular thing, doesn't mean that it wouldn't work well with another tool that you're applying somewhere else. It's not just where I sit, for instance, in integration or in visualization or in data science. It's how the whole thing interplays together, which I think is one of the things that sometimes gets lost, that when you silo the way that you deliver data solutions, you may have an excellent analytics capability, an excellent visualization capability, but if your integration is pretty poor, none of that's going to work. So perhaps you were better to have invested differently. If money was a question, think, how am I going to spend my budget wisely? To have invested slightly more in integration, perhaps not gone to the cutting leading edge solution for visualization, and ended up overall with a better solution. So I think it is nuanced.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, another interesting point that I'd like to talk to you about. So, and this is going back to the data trends. So, if you were to give a sort of, if you're starting your career again, I guess, or starting your career now, today, in the data space, what sort of methodologies or technologies or thought process would you be focusing on, and why?
Okay. I suppose I'm going to draw my own experience to answer this one. I think one of the biggest gaps I've identified in myself, and which I've progressively closed, through my career, and perhaps if I'd closed it earlier, my data experience would have been different, was doing research. And the example I'll take is when I was doing, a few years ago, I was doing my MA, and I did an MA in education and leadership. For part of that, I did a research project which was to examine the behavior of teachers, the observed behavior of teachers, as opposed to how they were experiencing their teaching. And one of the really interesting things was, in doing the observation, was having to recognize and then exclude my own biases in doing observation, which is what you do sort of in research. And I think just having that grounding is really, really important, because one of the things I quite often see in data, particularly when you're in the analytics and in the sort of machine learning AI space, is, oh, I've reached a conclusion, and you fail to recognize the biases that were there when you first input the data, the assumptions that you made, the things that you excluded, the decisions you made on the way in. And I think giving people a grounding in that, particularly as people are moving more and more into these sort of professions of data science and AI, of really understanding how you influence the outcome, even though you think you're just giving data to a machine. And it's down to what data you select, and how you choose to process, and what outcomes you think are valid and which outcomes you don't question. There can be an awful lot of bias, and we're becoming more and more conscious of unconscious bias in all spheres in what we do. So I think that's one area where I think it's useful for people to skill up. The technologies, again, you're probably going to expect this answer. I don't think it fundamentally matters where you start with from technologies, because whatever you learn today isn't going to be the technology you're going to be using in 5 years' time.
Fair point. Yeah, it's interesting you say. So I think you've given me a lot of food for thought, I think, as a recruiter within data. So often I'm asked to find candidates that have specific experience within very specific technologies, and that's because I'm being asked to by the businesses go ahead and find that person. So I'm just wondering, if I was starting out, being siloed and positioned into one technology, whether that's a good, a bad thing, I don't know. But that's just, again, something that I'm seeing in the marketplace for sure.
Yeah, I've got thoughts. I'm often, I'm acting as a hiring manager, and yes, there are times when you're looking for specific expertise in a given technology. You want somebody who really is sharp in applying that technology, and that's absolutely right. But more often, I'm looking for people who can also interact with business stakeholders, who can convey an idea, who can turn technical complexity into simple, plain English. Perhaps somebody who's able to work with a multifunctional team, or a team that's spread across the globe. There are more skills needed than simply being a good technologist. I think actually being a good technologist is having that broader mix of skills.
Absolutely. Okay, and this to inspire. This is with the view of kind of inspiring the next generation of data professionals. So, one of the questions I'm often asked by people coming into the data space, from an entry level point of view, is asking me for advice. And I'm not myself a data professional, although I hire into the data space. That's my specialism. So, but I'm really kind of always interested in speaking to data leaders like yourself around what piece of advice would you give the next generation of data professionals, perhaps that are listening to this podcast, and why?
Well, one is do it. It's one thing I don't regret is being in the data profession. I think it's fascinating. It brings you in touch with so much of what touches us as people operating in society. So one is do it. I think you need to love data. And I think you genuinely need to have a real love of data, but more than just a sense of the technology. But I think it goes back to that sense of understanding your real world through the eyes of data. And I suppose the words I'd use is observe. So be observant in your life, learn from what you observe, and then try to apply that to what you do as a technologist. And I think an example I'd use at the moment is we've all experienced the COVID pandemic in different ways. If that didn't inspire somebody to want to be involved in data, I don't know what would. If you think about, had we been able to avail ourselves of better data in the early days of the pandemic, how different the outcomes might have looked. How many lives might have been saved. How lives can be improved through good application of data, enriched and made better. Even what we're doing now, the experience of understanding how humans behave differently in Zoom conversations and in face-to-face. Think about doing a data study in that alone. How fascinating that could be. So it's a bit of it sounds a bit cliched, but in data the world really is your oyster. If you are a data professional, you can apply yourself anywhere you want, and if you really want to make a difference, as they say, there's no end of opportunities.
Yeah, that's a good piece of advice there, I think, and actually giving me a bit of food for thought myself. So yeah. Okay, I'm just conscious of time, Avi. So, but thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope everyone's enjoyed listening to your insights, and I'm fairly sure they have. So, hope it would be good to get you back on another show and perhaps discuss some new trends that we're seeing as the time goes on. But for now, thank you very much, Avi.
Great, Ryan. Thank you.
Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.